Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Ted Patterson's Power BI Dev Camp. Today we have the amazing Ted Patterson, Principal Program Manager with the Power BI CAT team, and the amazing Power BI royalty of presence of Amanda Rivera, who's a Principal Program Manager with the Power BI team. We'll be talking about developing with the Power BI Quick Create SDK. Ted, Amanda, good morning.
Good morning. I think my amazingness pales in comparison to Amanda's amazingness, but that's just me. Welcome, campers. We've got a special guest. Amanda Rivera's come to talk with us, and her and a few other people have been working on the Quick Create SDK. So she's going to introduce, what the whole idea behind this SDK, has been. She's going to give us a great demonstration. And then I'm going to kind of dive into some developer details about, how we can go ahead and program through this experience. So with that, take it away, Amanda.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here with you today. And as Ted said, I'm here to talk about our developer experiences for Quick Create. So Quick Create is a concept that we have developed all around trying to provide a simple developer experience for anyone who wants to offer automatic and interactive data analytics for their users. We really want to, on the Power BI team, empower anyone to get started with their data. And we know that, especially for less technical users, that sometimes it can be a big hurdle to start being able to self-serve and explore their own data. You can think of a typical information worker who is in a SharePoint list or in Dynamics or is in any other kind of application where they have access to a lot of data, but it can be just very overwhelming to start exploring that. So we thought about how we can help empower these people to do it themselves. And so we've developed this whole experience around automatically showing insights to users and giving them almost like a playground to be able to interactively explore it without having to know a lot of the more technical details about how Power BI works behind the scenes. So we built this whole experience around that for end users. And then we were like, well, this is a great experience, and we want to make sure that anyone can take advantage of it and put it inside their own application. So that's why we went ahead and built out this SDK that we're going to be talking about today. And so the first thing I wanted to do in that regard was to jump in and show a demo about how this all works inside of an example application. So let me just drag over my window here. So what this is Dynamics. Dynamics has this whole suite of apps around sales and customer service and HR, all around helping these information workers track their data, make status updates to things, track changes over time. And so a very key aspect of that is this big grid of data. Almost all of the pages in Dynamics are very focused on these grids of data. And they have in Dynamics a lot of functionality already built into that to be able to modify this table of data. You can, add new rows. You can go in and modify, individual rows and update status for things, filter things down, add and remove columns. It's a very advanced grid control. But it can be quite hard when looking at a table of data to be able to spot things like trends or find insights about it. And so that's why they've integrated in this Quick Create SDK to be able to support also visualizing this data over time. So you can see here, I clicked the Visualize This View button inside of the grid, and it automatically popped up a report for me. And when Dynamics was integrating this experience, they didn't pre-design a report for this because the data can change depending on the customer who's coming into Dynamics. They could have completely different columns, completely different schemas, but they did want to be able to provide some automatic insights. So when the end user comes in and clicks that button, a Power BI data set is automatically generated off of that data, and then Power BI can automatically look through all the data in that inside of that data set and find a set of visuals to put on the page. And you can either, as an end user of this experience, choose to let Power BI look through all the data and find interesting things to put on the page for you. Or as you saw me do a minute ago, I chose to pre-select some fields I knew I was interested in. So as an end user, I was interested in how much was sold at all of the stores for my pizza place that I'm tracking here. And then either way, depending on if the end user picked specific fields or waited for Power BI to show the insights, we automatically generate these set of visuals for the users. And all the visuals on the page are going to be a mix of the fields that were pre-selected in this year data pane and other fields that pair nicely with it. And so we have a bunch of heuristics that goes and looks at the data and comes up with, so this is a best chart for showing the two fields I selected, store location and stores amount. Store location is also interesting when showing discounts or amounts sold by menu items. These are all really interesting things. And so we were able to put them all together and build a nice report. We also show a bunch of other information on the page as well. For example, we show things like the aggregates of each of the some of the measures that are particularly interested, or numeric fields that are particularly interested in the report, and even use a smart narrative to come up with some interesting insights to explain to the user. So for example, in this case, I have my 2 store locations, and I can see that just from this insight that the one that has the most sales is 20% higher than the least, and other interesting statistics like that. And so all of this was just automatically provided to the end users of this application. They didn't have to know how to build a data set in Power BI. They didn't have to know how to drag and drop to create individual visuals and start trying to figure out what's interesting in the data. Power BI automatically provided that for them. And then from there, it's really easy to start interacting with it. Of course, since this is Power BI, it has all of the common things you would expect. For example, if I select one of the visuals and open up the filter pane, I can go in and filter down the data. I can also, of course, do things like cross-highlight, and I can pick pizza and see how the sales for pizza specifically are across all the different locations. And then we also have this show data button at the top. And whenever you click on this, it automatically pulls up a table on the report that shows all the individual rows of data that we're visualizing. So if you ever forget, if the end user ever forgets what data they were looking at the grid, they don't actually have to go back. They can just click on this view and see the individual rows, and even, of course, cross-highlight on it and see that filtered down. And then if the user wants to go further than just interacting with the report, we've also made it a very safe experience for users to make modifications to it. It's very simple. If I still want to have Power BI give me some insights, but I want to control what fields are going into that like service that hosts the insights, I can just add and remove fields in your data pane. So now if I go in and select discounts, all of the visuals updated on the page with the new information I fed it that I'm also interested in discounts. So now I get one visual on the right that has all 3 fields I selected, and then the right half of the page is updated to include visuals that include discount. So I'm able to make those kind of like modifications of still relying on Power BI to generate the visuals and find the insights, but just feeding it more information about what's interesting to me as an end user. And then I can also go in and personalize an individual visual as well. So if I want to take that next step and get much more refined about the visuals that I'm seeing, I can go in and I can do things like change the chart type. I can switch out what fields are being used on the axis for the numeric value, change out the aggregations, and even add new fields like to the legend. And so I'm able to go in and let me just, for example, change this visual type, make all these kind of more detailed modifications to my report that it was automatically generated for me. And then if I want to keep it, I can just use the save button on the ribbon here and give it a name and pick where it goes. This is, as an end user, I've been signed into my own Power BI account, so I can pick any workspace that I have access to. As a free user, that would be like my personal workspace, or if I have like a pro license, for example, I could save to any of the workspaces I have the right permissions to edit. And if my organization requires sensitivity labels, I can even set that for the data. And once I filled this in, the report basically goes from being in this temporary state that it's in while I'm modifying it here and gets converted into a normal Power BI report that is in the Power BI service in the workspace that I picked. And then from here, I can do basically anything I expect to do in a Power BI report. By default, we drop the end users into the same kind of like playground experience with the your data pane to start with, but you can, once you're in the Power BI service, choose to go into the full edit mode, delete visuals, move things around, use all of the advanced capabilities Power BI has for editing stuff, and even go and download the PBIX file that was created for this report, and be able to make much more advanced changes to it. Like I can go in and see the query that was generated to create that data set, add new tables, make modifications to the queries. At that point, it's just a normal Power BI file. You can do whatever you want with it. So this experience is all around, helping users just get started with Power BI and with visualizing their data. And it is very interactive. You saw all the modifications I can make in the report itself. But I also wanted to just point out that it can be very interactive with the application as well. So one of the things Dynamics did when designing or integrating in this feature, they wanted to make sure that what the user was visualizing was always exactly what's in the grid, because like I mentioned earlier, the grid is just so powerful in Dynamics. So if I go in here and I filter my data to just be pizza, and then I go in and try to click the visualize button again, it basically visualizes exactly that data that the user was looking at. So we generated a completely new data set off of that data that was filtered down. And if I go and regenerate the report, it will go in, and if I click show data table, you'll actually be able to see that all of the rows of data here are just pizza. So not only is it an interactive experience within the embedded component of Power BI, but can also be very interactive with the application itself. So this was a good example of how the Quick Create SDK has already been integrated inside of another application and has done a really good job of enhancing the application with additional analytic capabilities. And just to highlight specifically, I wanted to cover what some of the benefits are of this that you've hopefully been able to see from the demo. Obviously, the benefits for end users of any application integrating this experience are quite big. Users get one click effectively can land on automatically generated interactive reports based off of their actual data. And any reports that are generated are so easy to customize, so the users can focus on the data that is most interesting to them. It's not something that has been pre-built and someone else has told them that they are interested in. They have that control, which is something that is really nice for end users. Even with like pre-built reports by a traditional analyst, if they want to make an end user consumer wants to make changes, they oftentimes have to go to that analyst and ask for tweaks to the report. This one is all theirs. They get to control it. They get to see what's most interesting to them. And then since the report gets saved to the end user's workspace, they have that full report to modify the query in the model, or if they want to turn that into a official report that's used by a wider organization, they can take the PBIX and hand it over to a traditional analyst who can then take it even further, package it as an app, etc., for their company. And then the entire experience, it does require users to sign into Power BI to use it. In Dynamics, it kind of just auto-signed me in because I was already signed in, but an end user does have to sign in, but only requires a free license. So the user doesn't actually have to pay. Obviously, the same requirements in terms of licensing for Power BI in general applies here. So if the user is just free, they'll just have their personal workspace to save into. And then from the developer perspective, the integration, it's a user owns the data embedding. Ted's going to talk about that more. But what that does mean is that there's no cost for you to start using it yourself, at least monetary cost. There's, of course, developer time spent. But this means that if you're interested in having Power BI on your app, this is just a great way to start experimenting with Power BI and offering it to your users. And you also don't have to spend, since it's auto-generated, you don't have to spend a lot of time pre-building out template reports that meet all of your end users' diverse needs. Again, thinking back to Dynamics and all the different types of data that can be surfaced there. They obviously, Dynamics in their case, they offer both template reports and also this auto-generated experience. So both, in summary, lots of benefits to both developers and end users with this Quick Create SDK. So with that, I already did the demo. With that, we're jumping into Ted to talk about actually using this Quick Create SDK and how you can integrate it into your own applications.
Super. And I think I'm going to try to steal the sharing at this point. So if I go ahead and share, well, it's the same screen, so it should look the same. But are you seeing my slides yet?
I'm seeing Teams, like your calendar. Oh,
well, okay. Let's stop sharing that. Let me try one more time. Let's see if Ted can get out. I got two different screens here. Let's see if I go over here. Okay, so that should be now my slide.
Yes.
Okay. Everyone can see all this, the meetings I should have gone to. Okay, let's go ahead and start up. Now, one thing that Amanda said I want to kind of, in the nuance, is you have to sign in. But you don't have to sign into the Power BI service. You have to sign into a custom application. And as a developer, I can bring the user through an authentication flow. And the idea is that I can get the user, prompted to put in credentials. They will authenticate against Microsoft Pages and come back to my custom application, and I will have an access token, that has Power BI permissions in it. So what the user does need, as Amanda said, is definitely a Power BI license. And it's one of those things where if your content is in a premium capacity, it could be a free license. If you don't have any premium capacities, then they have to have a pro license, but basically it's going to be the same thing. Now, what I want to step through here is just kind of getting up and running with this new, what we call the Quick Create SDK. Now, if you've already done any Power BI embedding, you're already familiar with the library that we're using, Power BI.js, or what we call the Power BI JavaScript API, and you can program against it. You just need the newer edition that has this support. You can program in JavaScript or TypeScript, and it supports user owns data embedding. So we have a lot of customers that are using app owns data embedding, where you have external users, you authenticate the users who are never known to Power BI. We don't support that. Whether we'll consider doing in the future, really depends on, how we see this feature being used. Now, next thing we're going to do, is talk about the developer has to create an Azure AD application. So the idea is that your application, as it's running, will need to interact with an Azure AD application. You need things like the tenant ID, the client ID. And if you wanted to create your application, as a single page application using something like React, that's what I'm going to show here in the demo. You can do that. If you would rather use, server-side code and authenticate the user, with something like the authorization grant flow, where basically an authorization code gets sent back to the browser, and then you need server-side code with a key. Either one gets supported. You just have to be able to create an access token for the current user. And inside of that access token, you're going to have delegated permissions for that user. And the ones that we care about now are content create, dataset read write all, report read write all, and workspace read all. We have a couple beauty marks in the preview, and we're not able to straighten them out until the new year. But the one we have is if you have report read write all, it doesn't work. You need report read all. And once again, as soon as we get to the new year and all our kind of freezes are over, we're going to push out these changes. They're going to fix some of these minor things, but if you're testing it before the end of the year, I wanted you to know that. Now let's look at these interfaces. So I'm going to be programming with TypeScript, and as I said, you could program with JavaScript if you wanted, but everything about this API that we're using, the Power BI JavaScript API, is TypeScript enabled. So there is a quick create configuration, and it's just like the other embed configurations you might have used. And so within that, now we have something new. We have a dataset create configuration object that has a mashup document. What the heck is that? That's code for an M query. You have the locale. Are you English speaking in the US, or are you German speaking in Deutschland? We have a data source config. We'll see that in just a second. And then we have a table schema list and a data object. And so here are these interfaces that we've defined. Now, there's basically two things that you can do with the Quick Create SDK. At a high level, one way is to create input parameters where you actually are passing the rows of data in as you're creating the data set, and then there's no connection afterwards. It's kind of like an imported data set, except the import is a one-time operation upon data set creation. That's the first one we're going to look at that has iDataTable, iTable schema, and iColumn schema. After that, we'll look at one that uses a mashup document. And so either you're using a table schema list and data because you're pushing a table in, or you're using a mashup document and you're pushing a big piece of M code, which is the query that's going to run. So now let's look at the very simple hello world code. So this is the first one. We're going to create a data set just by pushing rows of data in. So after we create it, there is no data set. So we showed those interfaces before. iTable schema. It just gives you a name, and it gives you an iColumn schema array. And so, what do those column schemas look like? Hey, it's just a name and a data type. So you can kind of see how we're building, out that particular schema. And how about the rows of data? Well, here it's got a name, and then also it has rows. You gotta love this, which is an array of string arrays. You gotta love those arrays within arrays. Now, one other little blemish that we have right now that we're going to straighten out right after Christmas is that tables have to have a well-known name of table. I told Amanda it's kind of like naming your dog, but until we kind of get to after Christmas and push the changes out, just realize that, we're going to have to keep our table names table. Now, down below, let's look at this code now that kind of does the, quick create config. And what you can see is we have a data set, create config, which is what we've created above. And then we have these two different modes. If report creation mode equals default, it just opens up a report, a blank page, and then it's kind of typical Power BI report design with a blank canvas to start. Quick Explore basically says, don't let me add the web parts, but add a bunch of web parts, and that's the experience Amanda was showing, and that's the one I'm going to use. Okay, and what's down below? If you've done any Power BI embedding, hey, this is old hat. Instead of calling embed, or create report, we just have a third thing, which is, basically quick create. Okay, so now we've seen that. Let's look at the opposite. Here is when we are going to create a data set, and the data set will pull its data using Power Query, just like the things we create in Power BI Desktop. So the idea is that you have a mashup document. And that mashup document somehow, you're going to have to write code, in Power BI Desktop and, somehow get it into this form. I'm going to kind of give you some ideas about, how you might make that more manageable, but you can see, down below here, what we're doing is instead of creating the data table and the schema, we're just passing a mashup document. And what's critical here is at the end, you're setting strong types. If you do not set the types in Power Query at the end of the query code, everything is seen as a string, and all of a sudden the quick explore mode is absolutely no fun. Okay, now you've seen that. Let's go ahead and kind of jump into a demo. So I put together a demo so you could pull this thing up and open it up in Visual Studio, hit the F5 key. Let's go back here for a second. And one thing I wanted to show is that there's one thing you have to change. If I go into this demo and I say app, and there is an auth config.ts, and there is the tenant ID and the client ID. Imagine how lucky I got when I got these two GUIDs for mine. Okay, no, just kidding. So the idea is that you open this up, replace those, with an Azure application, that you've created, and then you should be, good to run this particular demo. Now, as far as the demo goes, it can be open and tested in any edition of Visual Studio 2022. I'm just using the Community Edition, which is free to download. And what you'll see is there's a couple different pieces. In the app folder, is a React style application, built using modern React techniques and built using TypeScript and Webpack. Okay, now there's also some server-side code. You could do everything in a single-page application with all client-side code, but then I'm thinking I want to get this collection of objects that's going to have M code embedded inside of it, and how do I pass that? So what I decided to do is just as a proof of concept, going to add some client, some server-side support. So there's a web API that the application will call into, just to get a whole bunch of demo create config, profiles, and we'll see what that looks like in just a second. Now, here's the demo I'm going to show. Let me just kind of step through what it's going to look like. The idea is when someone starts at the application, they need to log in. So they have to log in with an organizational account, which has Power BI running, and either they can work with their personal workspace, or if they have other workspaces where they've been given permission, to create content, they can save things inside there. So the idea is that the application will log on. It will then get an Azure AD access token for with all the permissions we talked about a couple slides earlier, and then it will provide this view right here. And the idea is that you'll be able to kind of click on different demos on the left, and then it will take one of the kind of demo quick create profiles I created, and basically allow me to demo it, and allow you, more importantly, to kind of download this project, start it up, and demo it yourself. Okay, so there's a lot in this application that you might not know if you've worked with React, if you haven't worked with kind of the modern React and authenticating in SPA, but I don't want to cover those details here, because I did that in our August session with modern React development with Power BI embedding, where we kind of drilled down on app-owns data embedding and walked through a lot of things, such as how we authenticate the user with his experience. So rather than going through those details here, I'm just going to point you back, if there's certain aspects of this code that you can't understand, watching this video certainly will help. Okay, so with that, it's demo time. So let's go ahead and dig in here. And so let's kind of start with this app right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start this thing up.
We do have a question though. Ted, did you want to take the questions now or later?
I guess I'm not sure what the question is.
Okay, it's a if the table name must be hard-coded to the well-known table, does that imply that we can only add a single table to the data set?
That is correct. Currently, we only support adding a single table. probably when we relift the restriction, so you can name your table something other than table, it's likely we'll still have the one table restriction in place, as we grow things out. I'm not sure if Amanda has a comment on that, but that's kind of what my understanding is, and that we're kind of looking to kind of grow multi-table support and joins out, sometime in the future. Now,
yeah, it's definitely on our roadmap, and we'll talk a little bit about the roadmap at the end.
Thank you so much. That's all for the questions now.
Okay. So once again, this is just a normal authentication with Azure AD. So as a developer, you control when the user goes through. Now my application has an access token that it's got back, and I kind of had some simple login, log out. And to kind of really, if you want to kind of master that piece of the Azure AD authentication, look at the past session. That's where we kind of drill down on this. So, let's look at this first one, simple sample. So, this is the one over here that we kind of showed on the slides. So if I drill down, into this TypeScript code, into services and go to the Quick Create SDK, you can kind of see that, here I've got some client-side code. Well, let's start with this one. And once again, I'm using TypeScript and I'm programming, against, these types, that are part of Power BI models, which is part of the Power BI JavaScript API. So let's go ahead and click here. And what you're going to see is that this is going to kind of start this process, of getting, the Quick Create session going, and once this, create quick session is all done, well, then you see I have a pretty simple data set inside here. And, I'd be able to do things, such as come in here, and switch it to a different, type of visual. Okay. Also note that we have save mechanisms. You could try this. This is something that we have a couple bumps, and we're going to kind of smooth those out, hopefully in the first set of changes that we're able to kind of push out, after Christmas. Now, let's look at the second one. So the second one, now we're going to, use a data source. So here, what you can see is that, one of my little elves I kind of sent to, take this particular query inside here. Let's go down to resources and countries query. And, here's how, I like to write things inside there. But somehow we kind of had to put these little, \r/n, because we're adding a string inside of JSON. So there's some characters, like the quote, which have to be escaped, inside of JSON inside. But what we have here, is that we're able to, create this new data set. It's able to inject the M code. Once again, I point out that currently in the private preview, we only support anonymous data sources. So, as you're doing your testing, keep that in mind. But now we see the different countries that we have inside here. So maybe it's not so much urban population density, but I want to see population. I want to see different countries. So you kind of see how users can kind of just get ideas, about different things that they want to do, just by, picking and unpicking columns in here and starting to get ideas about, how we can use something. Now, the second thing I want to show, is kind of how I was able to kind of have a POC that just has a whole bunch of different choices right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and refresh one more time, because as I look at Fiddler, what you can see here is that I have a web service, that I have in the back end that basically is passing back a whole bunch of different objects that have data, for one of these inside here. So for instance, if I go to a products list, what you can see here is the products list, is being created by, this table schema, this being sent across the network from my API, into the front. And so, here's the data inside. I can kind of see, what that looks like. And then, here's how, we're able to, push data in. Now, this whole idea of pushing data in by having the data table, think of the security implications. So I have this database that has data. I have 100 users, and all of them can only see a small subset of that data. So my application can query the database, get the rows for this particular user, and then I could lead them into the quick create experience where all that data is kind of pushed inside of that particular data set. So in one sense, it's kind of, there's no refreshing. It's a one-time fill of data, but for scenarios where that's perfect, you push it into Power BI, and then that's your security boundary. So once again, it doesn't work for all scenarios, but there are some scenarios, where that kind of approach, works out pretty well. Okay, now let's look at this next piece. And the next piece is, how we're going to deal with this messy issue of I've got to create Power Query, and I've got to be able to do things, like test it. And I want to be able to kind of create it in Power BI Desktop. So let's say that here I am in Power BI Desktop, and now I'm going to say I want to create a new blank query. Okay, in Power BI Dev Camp, we're uber geeks. We always go right for the advanced editor. That's the only acceptable. Okay, now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back, and I think I have a little example right here, of a query. And the idea here is that every NFL football team has a web page that has to have its active roster in a very standard format, which makes it possible to kind of create this query, that is then going to kind of go through and, replace different things. So the idea is that, can you get this thing working here? And now I get the thing working here, great. And now if I go back, here to my project and I open this up, what I want you to see is that you can't put things directly inside there. What you need, and this is because now we're kind of packaging Power Query, inside of a data set, and we have to kind of structure it. So what we see is up top, we need a section, and Power BI Desktop always calls it section 1. So I call it section 1. Shared, the name of your table, which until Christmas has to be table. And now we simply paste our query inside here. And the one thing that I kept forgetting that wasted hours of time was you got to put that semicolon at the end. So basically it's kind of seen. And what I suspect is, over time we'll grow out this ability to kind of, put extra tables that aren't shared. But the idea is that now we can come back here. So what you can see here is that I'm just kind of keeping my queries, in regular files with a .m extension. There is a 20-year-old developer geek trick where if you go up to resources, what you can do is you can take these and you can drop them inside here so they become embedded resources. Okay. And then finally, if we kind of look at the code that kind of pulls those things out, which is going to be finally right here, what you can see is that, now I can say, hey, go ahead and find the Wikipedia query inside there. And so, what does the Wikipedia query look like? So up on Wikipedia, there is a public page with anonymous access that has a list of the highest grossing films. And so let's get back to our test. Let's go back here to Wikipedia. And what you can see is that I can now, take lots of public data, off the internet and create, a really simple reporting experience, for some user, and then take that experience and just save the artifacts, right into, a workspace that they have control of, in Power BI. Okay, so let's say, who cares about the year? We care about the picture. What was the biggest picture of all time? Okay, Avatar, look at that, pretty good stuff. Okay, now, a couple other examples here. I have one which is just pulling a CSV file that has expenses inside of it. And, just like, you have seen before, when this is done, now someone can look at their expenses. What are they trying to look at? Hey, you forgot the number right here. So what I wanted to kind of show is an example, where we have to make sure we have at least one numeric category. Do I want to also, show some things with the, actual expenses inside here? So let's look at two more. Let's look at countries. And I already kind of showed countries, but what I like about countries is that kind of shows, how users can play around with the data, in this explore mode. And, we're talking about people that have no idea of what Power BI Desktop is, or would freak out when they go into report design mode. Yet it's not that hard for these people to kind of think of, well, I really don't want to see a continent. I want to see a country, and I want to see it by, land size, which ones, have the most land, or, which ones have the greatest population. So you can just kind of see that it gives you a great way, for non-technical users, to really experiment with data. And once they get something they like, now it's time to save and push things back. Okay, now what I showed before, was something where we're able to create this one query, and this one particular query, has a hard-coded URL. Okay, but let's get rid of that hard-coded URL. So now what we're going to do, is let's go back here, and what you can see is that if we look at the query itself, and I changed the query. So let me put it back to what it was, before I did these changes right here. And if I go back here to this NFL query, and so the idea is that we want to have, kind of a placeholder that we're going to replace inside there. So if I can find the roster for any of the 32 teams in the National Football League, I can put this inside here. So as a proof of concept here, here is a generic method, tell me what team and what is the roster URL. And we'll go ahead and kind of take that M code and, use it properly. And then, up top here, you can see that, let's take 3 of those different teams that we have inside there. So now if I go look at something, like the Giants roster, and once again, it's just kind of me exploring and finding a common schema. So I can create a, single Power Query, set of code, that, it has a polymorphic behavior of getting data that's in the same shape from different places and bringing back and reporting on it. Okay, I'm a Giants fan. It's horrible what's happening this year with the Eagles, how they're taking over and winning, but now that we have, some of this data, from players, inside of the NFL, let's go see what we can see about them. So let's say we come back here. Well, I probably care most about, who the player is, and there's the player, there's the player's weight. Oh gosh, couldn't I go up here? And now, maybe I want to switch this, into a table, so you can kind of see how, folks that have more advanced skills, might be able to do a little bit more. Now let's go through here and, do I want to have the height? And once again, there's things like, don't summarize that you're able to pick inside here. And, there's weight in pounds. Let's also, don't summarize. And then finally, what is your, experience in years, and, don't summarize, so you can kind of see, that you're able to kind of build these experiences right here. Hey, who's the tallest? Who's the heaviest? Who's the oldest inside there? So once again, just it kind of hopefully gives you a better idea, of some of the, scenarios that you can use this SDK for. Okay, and that now kind of takes me kind of to the end of the demo that I wanted to give. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of hand things back over to Amanda, so she can kind of talk to the future and the developer roadmap for this.
Thank you, Ted. So we touched on some of this throughout the presentation so far, but there's definitely a lot of work that we want to continue doing around this SDK to improve it. A lot of the near-term work that we're working on is, I would say, like smaller improvements, like, for example, fixing the tables name that Ted called out. That's definitely on the very near-term roadmap, letting you actually name your table. We also have some changes coming to, for example, set the default aggregation for fields. By default, in general with Power BI, any numeric column is summed by default, but sometimes that doesn't make sense. For example, like an ID column, or maybe it's ratings. Or years, yes. All of those things, summing is not what you want to do with them. So we want to allow you to actually, as you're integrating in, kind of like what the metadata is for each of these columns, and can appropriately set what is the right default aggregation for the field, which has kind of a dual benefit. One, the end user experience is much smoother because then they don't have to go and change the aggregations themselves. And two, the default visuals that we auto-generate will be smarter as well, because we won't, end up with a chart where we're summing a bunch of years, which will look silly. So we're going to have that improvement coming in the near term. And then there's going to be a lot of performance improvements as well. This experience depends a lot on how much data you're sending and how you're connecting to it. If you're just sending a small table of data, the performance is already very fast. But if it's a larger data set or a slower data source, it can take a little bit of time. And so, of course, we're looking into ways to continue to improve the performance and give users their auto-generated report faster. So lots of near-term improvements in that regard. And then looking out, kind of, I guess, longer term for the SDK, the two big things I wanted to call out here. First is the support for data sources with authentication. So this is something that obviously does limit what type of integrations you can create with the SDK. We want to really long term, if we're just thinking super long term, we really want to support any kind of data source the user can connect to in Power Query, pretty much all of those being exposed to the SDK as well. So any data source you want to connect to, we'd be able to support. There is a decent amount of work for us to be able to support these sources where you have to pop open like an authentication dialog so that Power BI can authenticate into the data source. So there's a lot that this won't be coming, tomorrow by any means, but I did want to make it clear that it is something that we want to support in the future. And then the second item is multi-table support. This came up earlier as a user question, but yes, today we only support single table data sets, but that is something that is honestly kind of like in our middle term, I guess, roadmap. That one is something that we are working on. It's, again, a big item, so it's not going to come tomorrow, but it is something that we are actively working on to be able to support. So you'll be able to give us multiple tables, specify a relationship between those tables, and be able to, generate much more interesting data sets and reports off of it. So lots of work still to come in the SDK, and as you start using it, let us know what else you'd like to see. We're very, Ted called this out also earlier as like, we're really looking to see how people want to use this SDK. What kind of interesting integrations can you come up with, and what use cases do you have, so that we can make sure it develops in the direction that you want. So definitely give us feedback on what is most interesting to you, and that will definitely have direct impact on our backlog, both near and far.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for coming and spending our monthly session with us here at Power BI Dev Camp. Thank you to Shang, who you work with, who gave me lots of tips about how to make things work in my demo. So we look forward to next year and kind of seeing the improvements and kind of seeing our customers starting to use this in real live applications. So I think here's a couple links here at the end. I'm just going to leave these up on the screen. I can put a bunch of links, into the chat window as well for everybody. And that should keep you. Other than that, I'm not sure if there's any questions. I think we're done with the content, and I'd be happy if there are questions that are coming in. Maybe I'll give another minute or two. If you have a question, go ahead and type that in, and we'll do our best to answer it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ted and Amanda. And please, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. Right now, we don't have any outstanding questions, which means you've explained everything perfectly. I love it. And we've got 3 resource links here, which is Embed a Quick Report, Quick Create class, and Quick Create configuration. So please do use those links. And then also, please provide feedback to Amanda and Ted. And Ted and Amanda, now that we don't have any questions in the chat, did you want to add anything to the presentation?
I don't think so. I bet there's no question because everyone has left to go start using this SDK. Yes,
that's definitely it.
That's exactly right. So we got them excited. They've all run out. Now they're all on their computers. So I think without further ado, we can adjourn for the day.
Awesome. Well, Amanda, thank you so much. Ted, thank you. Amanda, is there any other last words you'd like to say today?
Just thank you everyone for listening, and again, please let us know your feedback. We definitely want to continue working on this space and are excited to see what you do with it.
My last word is happy holidays.
Yes, that's a better one.
Amanda and I are very competitive with each other, as you can see.
Okay, and with that, we have come to the end of another fabulous Dev Camp. Thank you, everyone, and happy holidays. Take care. Goodbye.